Hello and welcome to Criminal Record, the Daily Record's new weekly crime show. My name is Norman Sylvester and I'm crime reporter with the Daily Record. Our special guests today are Gina McGavin and the author and journalist Jane Hamilton. They have recently published a book, My Mother's Murder, which gives a moving account of Gina's 37-year fight for justice after her mother, Mary Mclaughlin, was murdered at her home in Partick, Glasgow in 1984. In 2021, a Graham McGill was convicted of her murder and sentenced to life after DNA found at the murder scene was matched to him. At the time of the murder, McGill had been on leave from prison as part of a Training for Freedom programme, having served a sentence for sexual offences, and did not come to the police at the time. Gina and Jane, welcome to Criminal Record. Gina, your mum was murdered after a night out in a local bar near where she lived. Tell us a bit about the events leading up to the attack. When did you find out about your mother's death and who told you?
Well, I found out about my mother's death probably about 3 weeks after my father had died, but my mother had been a night out, and the call I got was from my brother Martin, and I thought that he was just phoning me up for something general within the family, and I was actually stunned, shocked to hear he was phoning me to tell me that he'd been to my mum's and that she was dead, and it seems like she had been murdered and the police were there at her flat.
It must have been a terrible shock. We subsequently learned that your mum lived in the Crathy Court area of Partick. She'd been a night out with a family member in a local pub. I think it was a Highland bar. It's now known as, I think it's the Duck or something similar. Tell us a bit about that. She would go out for a drink, just it'd be a night out, just enjoying some leisure time, enjoying a night out with friends.
Yeah, well, my mum socialised whatever time of day, whatever she felt like. Obviously, she wasn't working, so whenever she had time, she just went out for the company. Mostly for the company. She want to be in the house alone a lot. So it was basically that, and she was well known to a lot of people. She was bound to walk into someone, or she could sit and have a wee blether with. But mostly it was my sister she would be with.
That's right. It'd be a night out like any other. If you look for a night out, she would go there on her own, quite trustingly. Come back. It'd be a relatively short distance, maybe about a mile or something, maybe even less. She would stop off.
Yeah, approximately that. She wouldn't have any fear going home along the road on her own anyway, because so many people knew her. Because Partick at that time, everybody knew everybody, so she felt probably quite safe.
We mentioned earlier about Graham McGill. Are you concerned that he could be free or paroled in a few years' time? The tariff imposed by the judge was only 14 years, and it was backdated to 2019, which means he could be eligible for parole in 2033. Do you think that maybe should have been appealed at the time? It seemed quite a low sort of sentence in terms of the time he must serve in prison before he's eligible for parole. Do you think life should mean life given his previous convictions for sexual offences? Which we now know about?
Definitely. Anyone who's committed a heinous crime like that, life should mean life. They shouldn't mean, well, they get parole and they get listened to and they get the rehabilitated, because in the past, clearly Graham McGill wasn't rehabilitated because he was out on ready for leave when he committed that crime. So no, I don't believe 14 years is absolutely nothing at all, considering my mum had 11 children. It's like not even a year for each one of their lives, that yet we all had a 40-year life sentence waiting for him to be caught. No, I don't think it's right.
That's right. We know that, Lynn, that he was in prison at the time on a Training for Freedom programme, being convicted of sexual offences. He subsequently went on to commit other sexual offences. He was given a kind of quite a lengthy term of imprisonment. No, so this is a guy with a history of offending. It wasn't a one-off by any means, was it?
No. I think it's the whole system needs to be overhauled in the legal system.
The evidence that we heard at the High Court in Glasgow, McGill's former wife, Suzanne Russell, said he had confessed to the murder of your mum in 1988 and wanted to know what it was like to kill someone. You wish he'd come forward sooner, maybe easier said than done, but they did divorce in 1993. Would you have liked her to come forward sooner and identify him as a suspect?
Yeah, but for whatever her reason was, whether it be fear or she was really young at the time and impressionable and thinking he was just saying that, as like to make himself bravado, I don't really know. It's understandable from her point when she'd been young, but he did tell her about maybe 5 years before she married him, so she knew, she was aware that he'd said these and made these comments, but she maybe just didn't believe him.
Sorry, can I just add a point there that Suzanne Russell did tell the police that he was, she was a victim of domestic abuse while she was married to him. So it could be that, she was frightened that, he did say to her that he would, if she told anybody, he would do the same to her. She didn't know the identity of the woman that he'd murdered. He never told her. So, even if she'd gone to the police and said, my partner said that he murdered somebody, then, it would be like looking for a needle in a haystack. So to be fair to Suzanne Russell, she was probably under a lot of duress, and, she did give a very lengthy statement to the police at a time, when it mattered. And I doubt if she'd come forward any earlier, whether it would have made any difference.
Yes, you can understand that she's obviously terrified of any repercussions. It was interesting that when he sentenced McGill, that the judge did mentioned her evidence and said he found it quite compelling, didn't he?
Yeah, he did. Yeah, I mean, she was a very good witness for the police, but unfortunately, she didn't know enough information to be able to go to them any earlier than when she did. And I think they approached her because she was his former wife, and I think they were quite surprised at the depth of the information that she was actually able to give them.
We know that we know that your mum met McGill. She'd left the bar. She was heading back to her home in Crathy Court. She bumps into McGill during this journey back. She goes in the fish and chip shop and buys some cigarettes, chats away. We can only assume that both McGill and your mum go back to her flat. She's found 5 days later by your brother, and obviously from there a police murder investigation is launched. You've suggested that you think McGill might have had an accomplice or someone who knew more than they were saying. Gina, why do you think this is the case?
Well, that's actually the general consensus that's been within the family for all those years. It's been myself that's been pushing and pushing because I've been close to the ground, had my ears close to the ground, listened to things that I know to be fact and what's rubbish, and said, no, that person would have been known to my mum. So I don't feel that there's anything that even me saying now all these years later, it'll never change. Plus the fact of the CID at the time telling me, just stay vigilant, basically. Everything you hear, see, write it down, and I've done it. And that's exactly what, and he did make a comment at that often families are talking amongst themselves, and sometimes families themselves can solve it. But obviously we couldn't. And you can't go on suspicion. You need proof. So even if we were talking amongst ourselves, you still need proof.
You previously said that you'd quite like to meet McGill, and you've still got a lot of unanswered questions about your mum's murder. Is that still the case? You'd like to go and see him and just ask him, was there anyone else involved, or just find out more about, why he went back to your mum's flat, why he did what he did?
Yes. Although I don't see it realistically that I'll ever get that opportunity, and I don't even know what prison he's in, because victims don't get privy to a lot of information about the perpetrator. So I don't ever see that happening. I'd like to look him face to face in the eye and ask him, for whatever reason, but at least, come clean and say, was there someone else involved? Put a lot of members of the family's mind at rest as well, because they're still of the same opinion.
That's right. I mean, you will be eligible for parole in the years to come. he would be required to show some sort of remorse for what he did. For all intents and purposes, it was a random attack. We know he told his ex-wife he wanted to know what it was like to kill someone. That came out in evidence. But Gina, we don't really know to this day why he targeted your mum, other than for that reason. It was to all intents and purposes, it was a completely random attack, wasn't it?
Well, that's what the police are saying, and that's what Lord Burns said when he was sentencing him. But I don't believe it was a random attack at all. And so do other family members feel the same, that no, there's a lot more to it. We know the full history much more than what the police do. They can only go by facts, what they've got and what they can prove. So no, we feel different.
Yeah, the only person really can answer that at the moment is McGill. You know,
Yeah.
why he carried out the attack, why he engaged with your mum, why he went back to your mum's flat, and why he murdered your mum. We still need all that explained, don't we? We know who did it, but we don't know why.
Yeah, there's not any never could be a justifiable reason for anything like that, regardless. But it's just no, it's a senseless thing, and like why he would be in the vicinity of my mum and randomly followed her home all the way on his 2-day leave, that was due to be finished from Edinburgh prison, and spent his time in Glasgow. No, I don't believe it. I just don't believe it, that he targeted my mum. I don't think for a minute he didn't know something or someone closely related.
I mean, it was a brutal murder. We know from the evidence in court that your mum was strangled. She'd only met him a short time earlier. He's obviously left a flat in Crathy Court, left her mum lying there to be found 5 days later by a family member. Describe the impact your mum's murder has had on the family, and the fact you've had to wait so long for justice. Did you feel that during this 36-year period that the finger was being pointed at the family? Police always talk about, you know, the killer knowing the person responsible. Did you feel that there was a lot of finger pointing at your family, that, you know, that put unbearable pressure on the family over all the years?
Yes. The family, when they were talking amongst themselves, mostly did have the same opinion, that the person would have been known to my mum, and she just would not have let them into her house without having some knowledge of who they were, or if their uncle, she knew their uncle, she knew somebody related to them. She just wouldn't have let them in their house unless she knew something about them.
That's right. He's maybe said something to your mum that's put her at ease. Did you feel that's maybe the case, that he said some sort of information that would reassure your mum that she could welcome him into her flat?
Yes, it's possible it could have made her at ease, but I still feel that my mum it was known to her, and I feel a third person was around, and he just didn't go up there on his own.
And that third person could have come forward, obviously, during this period, but
Yeah,
didn't.
all those years ago.
Jane, tell us why you've done this book, and why it's important that Mary's story is told after all these years.
So I came to Mary's story back in 2016 when former Daily Record news editor Kevin Manzi had asked me to do an unsolved murder series. And we came across Mary's murder in the archives, and it struck us about the lack of stories about it, how this murder from 1984 had just seemed to disappear into the ether. There was even at the time, you know, it wasn't making front pages. There was a smattering of stories, but there wasn't an awful lot. And that's what struck us at first. We thought, how could this murder just disappear? I tracked Gina down, and needless to say, I don't think she was too chuffed at first to have another journalist on her doorstep promising the earth, promising to, you know, redo her mum's murder again. You know, most of us, we've got reputations of, you know, we'll do the story and then we disappear again. And we leave families, you know, with a lot more questions than answers. But for some reason, Gina trusted me that day, and we had a good chat, and we did our mum's story. It ran in the record, and for whatever reason, the story seemed to land where we wanted it to land, and we started hearing whispers that there was actually another investigation ongoing. And I think it was about a year later, was it, Gina, maybe? A year later that we heard.
Maybe about 2017, I think.
Yeah, so Gina and I kept in touch, and, you know, it's been nearly 10 years now. We've kept in touch with each other. And over the years, Gina would tell me that she wanted to tell her mum's story, and she'd actually self-published a book many years ago, because she wanted the truth, wanted her mum to be remembered. She wanted her mum to have a voice, basically, and she was desperate for her mum's story to be out there and, you know, not be forgotten. Because at the end of the day, you know, we need to remember that, you know, Mary was a human being, and she had a family, she had grandchildren, and she was loved. And Gina just felt that her mum deserved to have a bigger voice, a louder voice, and particularly, you know, over the circumstances of the murder itself and the 35-year hunt that Gina, you know, carried out, you know, obsessively, you know, trying to, you know, find out who had murdered her mum. So when she said, you know, I'd like to do a book, you know, we could self-publish it, will you help me? And I said, yeah, and it ended up in a bigger project, and Reach and PLC Mirror Books came on board, and they helped us tell Mary and Gina's story. It's not a whodunit, it's not a why done it, it's very much a victim-centered story. And, you know, murder doesn't just have one victim, it has many victims, you know, family members, and it affects people for all of their lives. So this is a story about Mary and Gina, and you know, it's poignant, it's sad, and, you know, we tried not to centre too much on Graham McGill, because the story isn't about him. It's about a woman who lived and died, and her daughter who just refused to give up.
Okay. Could you talk a bit about the police investigation? Obviously, it was a different era where they didn't have the sort of modern forensic technology. Talk us a wee bit, Jane, through just the kind of mechanics of how this inquiry was kind of revisited and eventually got a suspect. There's been quite a few kind of cold case reviews, but they had a fresh look at the DNA, didn't they, using the latest technology, and they managed to find samples on, I think it was a cigarette butt, the dressing gown cord that was used to murder, strangle Mary, and also a green dress. Just talks a little about that breakthrough, why there was obviously a delay, 37-year or 30-year plus delay, and suddenly DNA just kind of kicks in, doesn't it, Jane?
Yeah, I mean, thankfully, you know, in 1984, the scene of crimes officers had the presence of mind to preserve the productions from the crime scene, with the view that perhaps maybe one day technology would have advanced far enough that they would be able to get something from those productions. Because 1984, you know, mostly they would only be able to do fingerprints and blood typing. You know, DNA wasn't a thing back in 1984, and I think it was 1988 before the first sort of low copy DNA was used in a case down south. But fast forward to, you know, 2014, 2016, 2017, Joanne Cochrane, who was a forensic scientist, was actually crucial in helping to solve this case. She had the patience to untie the knot on the ligature that was used to strangle Mary, and found fibres within. And I think, you know, it took weeks and weeks and weeks of slowly untying this knot to get to the DNA, because Joanne thought that if there was anything from the killer, it would be inside that knot, and the killer would have left some sort of deposits on that. And lo and behold, they did. And it matched the cigarette butt, and they put it into the DNA database and got a hit on Graham McGill. But you know, it's testament to the, you know, the foresight of the 1984 scenes of crimes officers in the original police inquiry. You know, subsequent, there were 4 reviews into Mary's murder between 1984 and 2017, and none of them yielded any results until, you know, forensic science had moved on enough that the police were able to get the low copy DNA. But as we've already said DNA was never going to be enough to solve this case, because Graham McGill had an alibi, and it took, you know, old school detective work, boots on the ground from the cold case inquiry team to, you know, finding, I'm trying not to give spoilers here, but they found something that enabled them to, you know, actually point the finger at Graham McGill, because he did have a very strong alibi in that he was in prison at the time Mary was murdered.
What's also worth pointing out is people might, how it works is that McGill, subsequent to the murder of Mary, had committed another sexual offence for which he was imprisoned. They would have taken a DNA sample, which is standard now in most arrests. It goes into a database and just lies there. So it means now that police can get any DNA samples from old style evidence. They can then match it to existing names on the database. And we know that there's thousands of men now in this database, isn't there, Jane?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And, you know, I think, you know, these tools that they've got at their disposal are vital. You know, a lot of people might bang on about their human rights and the fact that their DNA is on a database. But when you look at cases like Mary's and the World's End, you know, the 2 girls that were murdered in 1977 in Edinburgh, and it took 34 years for their killer to be discovered. You know, these DNA databases are crucial in crime detection and, you know, giving families answers. You know, could you imagine 30 years, 35 years of, you know, not knowing who or why killed your relative, you know? So, you know, I do think that, you know, the DNA database is the right and proper, you know, thing for us to have.
Gina, what was your reaction when you were told about the arrest of McGill and the fact that he'd been on day release from prison at the time? So you, effectively, when the murder inquiry was launched, he was back in prison. What was your reaction when you heard about the arrest and the kind of story that emerged about McGill?
But my reaction was although I was shocked at her murder, but I was also shocked that after all that time that they had actually arrested someone. I wasn't confident that I would ever see it in my lifetime. I thought, I'm going to go to my grave and I'm never going to know what happened to my mum, really, the full story. And I was shaky, I was a bit teary, I was just normal human reactions. And yeah, the fact that he was out on leave and the fact that he'd been given parole and the fact that he'd been in front of a parole board who made a decision to let him out, lots of things ran through my head.
And obviously there was a slightly unusual circumstance that they'd been on day release from prison. And there was, you know, he was back inside the prison by the time the police investigation was launched. But at the end of the day, it was modern technology, wasn't it? And as Jane alluded to earlier, it was a kind of foresight of the officers at the time, wasn't it, to keep all these samples, keep your mum's dress and the dressing gown and the cigarette, wasn't it?
Yeah, there's all that, and there's a few other things came to my mind, but there is the technology that we've got now, thankfully, that, you know, it was able to do that and secure a conviction. So he'll be there, he'll be for whatever, maybe he'll die in prison because his health's not good, but, you know, that's been taken into consideration. And I really don't think victims get the chance to do the victim impact statement. I didn't get a chance to do that because I'm not in the pecking order. It starts with only 4 and down to the 4th, starting from the oldest down to like the 4th, second oldest, and so on.
You're one of 11 children.
Yeah.
That's it.
Circumstances where there weren't very many impact statements given, but I just thought, well, I'm going to keep on from what I know, because at the end of the day, I know probably much more than the police. I don't have the technology, I don't have all of that behind me, but I do have a lot more facts that I know to be there, but it's proving your facts. And the DNA certainly proved that McGill was the one.
He was the right man. And on the positive side, though he's been told he must serve 14 years before he will be considered for parole, there's no guarantee that he will get out. That's a positive, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a positive that he may never go out. He may die because he does have a health problem. But at the end of the day, it never accounts for the amount of lives that he's affected, and the children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, the years it was hanging around the family, what is done to the family over the years. It's 14 years is absolutely nothing.
Just more generally, we know that he was a serial sex offender. He murdered your mum. Do you think McGill should be investigated for any other unsolved murders or similar type crimes? Do you think this is somebody who, from what you know about him, could have struck before other victims?
Maybe a sharp-eyed, maybe a sharp-eyed detective will pick up on that and start searching their database now for other ones that are unsolved and connect the dots. It would be good if they could do that. But, it's, in my mind, a lot of resources, a lot of money, a lot of, and I know it is a very expensive business. You can't put a price in a life, though.
Finally, it's a question to both you and Jane. You first, Gina. What lessons can we learn from this? What would you like to see the lesson learned from this? The fact that, justice can be served if you fight hard enough. What lesson have you learned from this? What can you take? What positives, Gina, can you take from this whole experience?
The positive, if you can get a positive of it, it's just you don't give up. Some people can. Even though it's been difficult, I still wasn't giving up. I just wasn't giving up on getting to the truth, getting to the whole truth, and the whole story being out there, because it is much more complicated and it is a very complex case, especially the passage of time and people passing away and people. They lose their allegiance to who they might have had in 1984 as their ally, and it changes, and they could maybe it's just keep going. But I think a positive thing is, it's sad, but it's made me stronger, and the positive outcome has been my mum's book with the help and support of Jane. I feel we could have had a bit more feedback from the police over the years, because I did go several times, but there isn't, and you can't do anything about what's done. Mistakes get made all the time, but I still feel if it's made me stronger and say, okay, I can move on, and hopefully I'm not stuck with it. I've done my best for my mum, and just try to move on with what's left of my life now. But I'm happy that I've had the opportunity to be able to go and do that book along with Jane. That's a positive thing. And maybe give hope to other victims of heinous crimes as well, any crime, to be able to not give up, but it is hard. If you get the support, it's a bit better. And
Jane, what do you think the lesson we can learn from this almost unique case?
Yeah, no, I think it's important for people to realise that, as Gina says, don't ever give up. Technology is moving at an incredibly fast pace. The police do look at so-called cold cases, and justice hopefully does eventually catch up with people. And I think that's something that those that are still waiting for answers to crimes should cling to, basically, as just don't give up, and keep pushing and keep your family or your relative in the public eye, because it does help.
Thank you, Gina and Jane, for joining us, and thanks to our audience for tuning in to Criminal Record. If you have a question for the team, you can email reporters@dailyrecord.co.uk, subject line Criminal Record. We will be back next week. In the meantime, you can subscribe to listen to this podcast on Spotify or Apple Podcasts by searching for Criminal Record, or you can watch it each week on our YouTube channel. Thanks once again to Gina and Jane.